Hello and welcome to the channel. I had wanted to make a special video as I found a rather interesting new development in my understanding of these Montandon watchmakers. And it does appear that a watchmaker that I had really not paid much attention to has surfaced. And this is mainly due to an 1877 chronometer trial at the Neuchâtel Observatory, and this was a huge collection of these local watch manufacturers and watch experts who submitted their timepieces, and we see this 1877 placement, and this is we find in the list of individuals in 24th place. Now that's actually quite high when you look at the amount of individuals. We're talking 300 along this variety. So he was certainly above the top 10%, but he was finishing quite high. And this was a young man who, it turns out, well, we do find this individual named as C.O. Montandon of La Chaux-de-Fonds. And the watch serial number for this is serial number 1. And this is all very fascinating. This does tend to indicate that this C.O. Montandon was submitting a watch specifically for the trial, the observatory or chronometric trials. And when I started to look at who this possibly could be, as this wasn't quite familiar to me, I do find in Davoine Almanacs, and he was there all the time, but I had surmised that this individual is mentioned in the 1875-1876 Davoine Almanacs as a repasseur, a remonteur. So this would have been an individual who had the technical characteristics of somebody knowing how a watch works, how to repair a watch, indeed making components for said watch, etc. So he would have had the technical ability to produce a watch. And this individual I had fixed as Charles Oscar Montandon. And he was a Montandon Blaise Leon. Now, Blaise Leons, it should be remembered, are the key genealogical branch behind Montandon-Furs, Locla, and Paris. However, this Charles Oscar, his father was Jules Henry, and Jules Henry in 1853 did go to the United States, where he represented Montandon-Furs Paris for watch springs. And this is quite fascinating. So we already have a connection with Montandon-Furs, and indeed Jules Henry and his father were involved in litigation against Louis Montandon of Rambouillet and Paris. This was the Louis Francois who was in charge of, he was the main director of Montandon-Furs in Paris and Rambouillet. So apparently there were watch springs that were purchased by Jules Henry and his father, and his father was Charles. And at any rate, Jules and the father appear to be avoiding payment for this, and therefore this lawsuit was brought against them, and they ended up having to pay for these. Now, their excuse had been that these watch springs were of too poor quality, and there was very bad quality in these goods, so they refused to pay. However, we do have this Montandon-Furs connection, and now I wanted to bring this Charles Oscar in as in this 1875-1876 listing for him. Now he is at a street called Manège, and this is number 18. And it is very fascinating because at this particular time, on the other side of this building, now we have parallel streets, and we have Rue du Grenier on one side, and then we have Manège. Now, the other side of this building is occupied by Montandon-Furs, and this is specifically the sons of Jules Frederick Montandon, who we do know was in Neuchâtel City in Courcelles, we find him running some sort of operations for Montana Furs Lokla in Neuchâtel City from Courcelles. Now, this individual did have certified connections with Montana Furs, and his sons were most probably, and we do find them listed at this grenier on the other side of Maniège for as Montana Furs in the Devoin almanacs. And this is from the early 1880s up until around 1888, 1889, and after that we don't see it called Montana Furs anymore. So at any rate, they were most probably doing parts of watches for Montana Furs' own production, and this seems to be related to dial manufacture, but probably not only that. They were probably in charge of various parts or aspects for certain types of watches for Montana Furs. But so this connection, and indeed we don't know that this building may have been connected through these buildings as they occupy the same wall in the center of this building, and it is very likely that there is some sort of Montana Furs connection indeed, as we do know that the father was involved with them, that perhaps Charles Oscar was also doing some sort of fabrication for them, some fulfilling a specialized role. It's not clear, but there does seem to be an ample amount of circumstantial evidence which does point to this based on the family connections. Now, in the next almanac where Charles Oscar appears, now the first mention was only as Charles Montandon, but he disappears from that location, and then we find him at Rue de la Demoiselle number 4, and this was properties owned by his father. And in the 1879 almanac, we find him listed at that address for chronometer and chronometer de poche. So these are pocket chronometers. And this is very interesting. Now, the 1877 watch that is serial number 1, I had thought that there may only be a single watch behind this individual. Now, he died quite young. He died between the ages of 21 and 22 years old. So he died in 1880. So right after this 1879 almanac listing in Devon, we do not see him mentioned anymore. But it does appear that he was specifically producing pocket chronometers, and this is very fascinating. Now, since he died so young, and he would have been just starting in business most likely, but there probably are more than one watch. There's at least this one watch by him, but since he had his own business, we have to assume that he was probably producing at least several dozen watches. These would be very rare. Certainly this chronometer trial watch serial number 1, that was specially made most likely for this competition. So we have, that is a unique piece. However, there is a reasonable suspicion that he was producing at least certain high quality chronometers for his business, which he was selling for his profit, etc. But this is very interesting. Now, we do have very little information about Charles Oscar. We do see him mentioned in 24th position at the test in 1877. We see him in the almanac listings very briefly, and I have not been able to discover how he passed away. But we do know from Frederick Jules Montandon, Les Montandons, genealogical source, that he did die in 1880. But it's not exactly clear what was the cause of his death, why he died so young. So we do have this, but this is very interesting because we see a little bit more these family connections, the cooperation, that it's now very possible, very plausible that Charles Oscar was doing some role of fabrication during this 1878 period before 1879, when we find him already established, certainly under his own roof. Well, it would have been the roof of his father, but clearly he had his training, and he was doing some form of watch repair services at the beginning, but then he was competent enough and he had backing enough from his father. Now, his father was a very big individual in the local municipal administration. He was vice president and later president, I believe, of the council, the communal council. But he was basically he was a government figure ahead of the Neuchâtel government at that time from La Chaux-de-Fonds. So we find him 15 or 20 years in these roles where he is taking the presidency, etc. There are several individuals that this switches back and forth from, but he remains a community councilor. So, but clearly there were contacts with from this side that the father, who was himself not producing watches. He may have had people producing underneath him for his own profit as a business, but clearly the son was receiving backing. So another point I wanted to bring up with relation to the connections of his father are the following. Now, we do know that Jules Montandon was a Freemason, and he was also involved in this was called amitié, l'amitié, and crèche de l'amitié. So this is actually exists still today. And when he died in 1886, he willed over 2,000 books to this center. Now they have a daycare for children. They provide education, more or less a kindergarten, but they have always been involved in these social works. And this is within the framework of this Masonic Lodge. They have this outreach. And that today is also located on Magnesh. Now, some of these buildings and addresses were reorganized, and there was a movement. And indeed, I believe that this building that we're speaking of, which on one side, Montagnan's operation was on Grenier, and on this side was the other side of Magnesh was where Charles Oscar was. These buildings, I believe, have been destroyed or redone. So these were not the same buildings. And there's basically, it's still not, this building isn't standing anymore. However, at Magnesh I believe it's number 19, which would be right next door, across the street, etc. This is where this Crèche de l'Amitié is located. So once again, we see the son, we see the father, we see this Masonic Lodge and this Amitié, the kindergarten of today. It's still in La Chaux-de-Fonds. They still provide communal services. But we do see a very interesting nexus. Now, I did want to also mention that from the other address, Jules Montandon was a large property owner. His father, Charles, had purchased a lot of these properties in the 1830s and 1840s, and they renovated a lot of these. There was a place called, I believe it was called Chronometer, if I am not mistaken, if I haven't confused this with the other makers. This was rebuilt at huge cost from his pocket. This would have been Charles Montandon, the father of Jules Henry, and now Charles Oscar, and now he probably was named in honor of Jules' father. But he seems to have gone more by Charles. However, since there was a Charles Frederick Montandon at the same time from Locla, we probably have this differentiation of C.O. Montandon, La Chaux-de-Fonds, versus Charles Frederick C.F., which we also find him participating in these trials. And indeed, one of his watches also placed relatively high, and we find him in these roles. But this other address, which is at Rue de la Demoiselle, number 4, this later, after the death of Jules Montandon, and now his son, Charles Oscar, had died 6 years prior to his death. This apparently went to one of the other daughters of, I believe this is then Jules Frederick, or one of the other relatives. The daughter basically inherited this, and she was married to Theodore Sumher Montanden, and Theodore had his own watch business, and indeed he was behind patents, and we find his name a lot. He actually had a Havila brand, which he later sold on, but this was located also at this Rue de la Demoiselle, number 4. And we find this throughout the 1880s. And so we have these family businesses. This is an alliance family because the daughter had got this from the will, and her husband was also running business and established here. This would have been a prime location, a very high quality area, and therefore it was probably deemed more suitable for their business since they moved into this as opposed to staying in their old dwellings. But this is quite interesting. We have all these family connections. We have the locations, which do tell us a lot and also point us in various different directions as towards our understanding of the watchmaker and what is behind, a little bit behind their business. And we have so much, even though this is a very mysterious young maker. He died young at the age of 21 or 22. And I just wanted to document this after finding a watch that he made with the serial number 1. So we have a unique watch, at least one, but probably there are some others. He probably was selling some of his own watches, which would have been at a higher price. And indeed, one of the reasons for doing these observatory trials was to get reputation and recognition as a chronometer producer, manufacturer, somebody who could make these high quality pieces. And indeed, any watch that would retain this bulletin de marche, this would be worth much better money, much higher amount of profit involved for the maker. So it was certainly sought after too. This is another reason for going through the observatory process, is to get this sort of documentation behind the watch, which brings a higher value. So I hope this video wasn't too long, but I just wanted to share this curious young maker, Charles Oscar Montanden, who nearly evades the radar, but we found another watch producer, watch manufacturer, albeit probably very small amounts, but I just wanted to document this interesting case. So I hope it was useful and enjoyable, and appreciate your feedback. And if you have any other requests on video topics or any questions, please submit them. I'm always happy to get your feedback. But thank you and have a nice evening. Bye-bye.